This is the Sunday stream opening song because the other song is copyrighted. La 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 la. Oh look, here comes Dog Cat Fox.
Hi, Sky.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday stream. The stream I do on Sundays because Sunday's the day to stream. On Sundays. Hope you're all doing well this morning. Oh, what an early morning it's been because I slept in, which doesn't happen very often. But here I am. Rock me like a hurricane. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you've all enjoyed your weekend thus far. We're 1 week closer to the wonderful world of the holidays. So I hope everyone is safe and well. And we'll get to that, of course, at the end as well. If I can talk this morning because my brain is still waking up, even though I've been awake for the last 3 hours. Oh boy, can you stand the tension in the air? You know, you got the holidays mixed with all the worry and everything else. It's a very sort of schizophrenic time of year, or at least in this particular year, which has absolutely nothing to do with the speakers or subject matter we'll be covering again today. After last week, boy, oh boy. So before I get into that, let me say good morning to those of you that have joined me this morning. I don't want to forget you, of course. Matt Barnes, Johnny Hellcat, Jamie Melquist, A Scanner Daftly, Kiever Dam, Ebony Williams, Ryan R., Mike Savage, Wayward Lad, Neon Leon, Green Death, Non-Vitae Rex, Check Your Logic, Chicago Mike, No One Nowhere, Zidwi Atawari, Pip Bin, good morning to you all. So for those of you that were not here last week, you can, of course, watch the previous episode at your leisure. But in short review, we were looking at an organization suspiciously called EmbraceRace. And the subject of their conversation was how to instill a positive self-identity in young Bipoc children, but specifically a positive racial self-identity. And our guests... well, first and foremost, and you will see this if you watch the first episode. Part of the reason why I'm doing a second part to this is because of our hosts. Our hosts, unlike, as far as I can recall, there was one video I did years ago, which was a scripted video. There was a panel discussion amongst female business leaders, and they were being interviewed by Soledad O'Brien. And Soledad O'Brien, I made a comment of this at the time, Soledad O'Brien, as a host, was one of the first people I had seen at that point in my YouTube career of panel discussions who actually held the guests to the fire on answering questions and didn't just let them get away with it. I mean, she eventually kind of gave up, but at least in the beginning, she gave it a decent try. And it was such a rare event that I made comment of it at the time. And not since her, as far as I can recall, have I had a panel discussion, even if it's a small panel, where the hosts have actually tried to get the guests to actually answer the questions posed. And that is the case with our hosts here. And I'm very glad for that. Now, I may still fundamentally question and disagree with the thrust of their organization and their philosophy, but that's beside the point when it actually comes to them trying to get the most out of their guests. And they did try. Oh, did they try. So, in brief, what have we reviewed so far through the first half of this video? Well, they asked, what are the signs that a child has either a negative or positive racial identity? And from Jonathan, our first speaker, we had, I don't know what you want to call it, this long block soliloquy of nonsense, right? Just nonsense. It went on for like, what, 3-4 minutes or something of him just like rattling on all this buzzwords and stuff. And then they asked the lady guest, whose name I forget for some reason right now, and she gave like a 3-sentence answer. I was like, okay, see, that wasn't so tough, was it, Jonathan? And then they moved on to like, what are the sources that could contribute to a negative racial self-identity or a positive racial self-identity? And Jonathan talked about the Disney Channel. That's one point. And then the other speaker talked about, advertisements and TV, and then how you should have in your home things that reinforce your racial identity, and also go to, black-owned barbershops and stuff like that. I was like, it was just the overall themes that I got out of the first part of this is that the advice for instilling a positive racial identity in children is to effectively, and I am simplifying this, you'd have to listen to the first part, of course, but whittling it down, it seemed to be the message of stay with your own kind and directly associate skin color with culture, which aren't exactly notions that I haven't heard before in these sorts of talks, but all the same, it was interesting when talking specifically about young children, which I know is also something that I've covered several times before in education. But yeah, so that's kind of where we left off. I have backed up the video a little bit so we get the beginning of the next question posed to the speakers. And that's about it. That's where we're at, and I'm curious to see what we have next. Arc 210, Anthem Ward. Who else is here? Is that Nathaniel Taylor, Becca Fairley, and Zero the Hero 909. Good morning to you all. All right, so with all that as preamble, again, the first part is on the channel if you want to go watch that first if you're coming in late. Otherwise, we begin at about halfway at 26:16 of an even 1 hour presentation. Let's begin.
I wonder, I mean, it's interesting, Jonathan, to certainly, and we know that famously the Latinx community, the Asian community are they're so disparate, that it's hard to fit under one word like Latinx.
Except that you guys do that on a regular basis. And don't get me wrong, I realize that Latinx is just a variant of the word Latino, or you could say Hispanic, and that is an umbrella overarching term for a plethora of different nations and cultures and peoples and everything else. But you're not changing the norm by simply adding an X to the end. I mean, if you wanted to get more granular in describing different peoples and things, great. That would show the actual diversity rather than homogenizing everything under one term. So if you're moving towards that end, I'd be interested to see how you do that. But you're actually not changing the game by changing an O to an X. Not at all.
But I think, Sadika, I mean, I think that a lot of people and kids feel those strains in the Black community as well, in any community, in the many multiracial people among us, that we're kind of, with kids, isn't it really about their, just nurturing their identities, and letting them be who they are? Because there's the kid, there's the Black kid who likes Star Trek and doesn't feel, a part of their community. And
the Black kid who likes Star Trek. Have you paid attention to Star Trek over the last, 30 years? Do you understand the underlying message and themes of Star Trek that Gene Roddenberry tried to push? Michelle Nichols in the communications chair, the first interracial kiss on television, that was the big deal. Benjamin Sisko, Geordie LaForge. Yeah, because, there have been no Black characters in Star Trek. So are you classifying Star Trek as a particularly non-Black interest or something? That's bizarre. But yes, let's instill in children a positive racial identity. We want them to be who they are, but we also want them to very explicitly identify themselves with their skin color. If you want them to be who they are, why are you interfering so much? Or I should say, as third parties to other people's families, trying to interfere in how they raise their own children.
The list goes on and on and on. So part of it is teaching kids that there are as many ways to be Black as there are Black people, right?
How about just as many ways to be who yourself? Be who you are. Why bring race into the equation in the first place? I guess in both this presentation and so many that I've seen in the past, what is the overall benefit of making race a factor? What does it have to do with anything? Am I relating to someone because of their skin color or because we have a common interest? Let's say Star Trek. Shouldn't that be enough? Why is race important? Now, maybe I missed it. Maybe there was some attempt at a sales pitch on the subject, but I don't recall that we ever heard from any of our speakers in the last part a explanation as to why we need to emphasize race. Like, what does that do? What benefit does that bring in and of itself? And conversely to everything else they're talking about, why shouldn't white people also do the same?
Right.
Yes, I like that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Can I tell a quick story? Is that okay?
Can you tell an anecdote? Gosh, Jonathan, I don't know. What have you been doing this whole other time? The previous half of this presentation and your long, rambling, quote unquote answers. What have you been telling us? But nothing but stories and anecdotes that, amount to practically nothing. No, go ahead.
Yeah.
So I went to an all Catholic private school. I was
An all Catholic private school. Okay.
blessed because they said, hey, they needed to meet a quota, and I was fine meeting the quota. I will admit that.
You were fine meeting a quota. So I'm assuming then you were selected, or you're implying you were selected based on your race and or ethnicity. So you didn't get into this private school because of your own merit, and you're fine with that. Really? Okay.
And I paid very, very little to go to that school.
Right. Okay. So you got an advantage in education on the basis of your race, and you're okay with that. Okay.
But I was part of a Bipoc group that we supported each other, and we call it the minority spot. It's probably not the right thing to say as an adult, but when you're 16 and among 1,000 other Caucasian folks, and you're the only handful of kids, you had each other's back.
Okay, well, on reflection as an adult, what would you, and maybe he's about to answer this, I hope he is. If that was your 16-year-old immature, perspective on the whole thing, what would you have done now with your knowledge since then? Or what would you encourage children in the same situation to do otherwise? I mean, I would hope you would try to encourage kids to not just congregate on the basis of their race and open their horizons to other people outside of their, I don't know, racial cohort, whatever else you'd like to call it. But okay, where are you going with this anecdote?
But part of that conversation that we had growing up, as we were older men now, was a lot of opportunities to go to Europe and trips that were going to be sponsored by people and to see the world or to explore. And what we used to say to each other, which I regret now, was that's not what Mexicans do from South Phoenix. I'm not going to that.
Okay. All right. So you recognize now that sort of a personal xenophobia was not a positive element. Okay.
Or people would say, oh, I don't ski. I don't do that. And as I got older and I started to mentor, I called what I tell the youth that I talk to now is I call that the ghetto mind state. And to me, that was this idea that stereotypes placed on us by media, by this larger, world that has said that you have to fit in this box and do these things.
Okay. So your personal autonomy, your personal agency as a child was not your responsibility. You were the victim of media and stereotypes. I mean, what if you actually don't like skiing? What if you actually didn't have any interest? But okay, so your decisions as young people to not be interested in going to Europe had more to do with society telling you what you could or could not do, even though you were, I'm assuming, given the opportunity to go on these things, but chose not to? Or Okay.
And I look back and I think about all those missed opportunities
Yes.
to either see the world or to experience something
Yes.
and be that kid that I may, I like Star Wars. So I'm okay saying I like Star Wars, but
What is okay, I'm sorry. Two of the most globally loved franchises up until the last 10, 15 years or so because of what their current owners have done to them. Either way, two of the most globally loved franchises that have brought together everyone on the planet in a mutual love and appreciation because the themes were universal, the characters were disparate and diverse before that even became some kind of sociological imperative. And I'm willing to admit I like Star Wars. Dude, I mean, I hate to say this to you. Grow up. Like what so what? Star Wars, Star Trek, it's just aren't you, by saying that, implying the same stereotypes you say you were a victim of when you were 16? Huh? Why is that something you have to sort of apologize for or underline as some sort of separator between you and who else? What is that? This is. Oy.
think about how many other kids who we don't support to pursue these paths into arenas that can really bolster and feel accepted into worlds. And then to have those things reflected, I think that was the pressure in the newest versions of Star Wars, that they're more diverse than we grew up with.
The new versions of Star Wars are more diverse than we grew up with. Really? Really? You know what the cantina scene in A New Hope sort of underlined about the Star Wars universe? Diversity. I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds crazy. The movie from 1977 in a room full of puppets might have had a message about a vision of the future or a vision of another world. But the cantina scene gave you a sense of the vastness and variety of the Star Wars universe and how a giant hairbag of Chewbacca was sat down and spoken to like anybody else in the room. Right? Where every time they came up against another alien creature, they were talked to and interacted with like they were anybody else, because the Star Wars universe was based on diversity and discovery and interaction with different peoples and cultures all the time. C-3PO, right? He's versed in over 6 million forms of communication. Why would anybody program a droid with 6 million forms of communication unless you're living in a universe that requires such? There is nothing, quote unquote, more diverse about Disney's Star Wars than what wasn't already implied and displayed in the original films, even the prequel movies. But, our guy here, he's a big Star Wars fan, so obviously he knows that the more recent Star Wars movies are more diverse. And I know why he's saying that, because of the races and or genders of the human characters.
Late 70s and early 80s. So
nonsense.
I think there's a lot of richness there.
Nonsense.
Thank you. Sadika, what's your thinking?
So I'm thinking that, Melissa, I'm glad that you brought this point up, because I think it's important that we highlight and appreciate diversity within a group.
Diversity within a group? You're a doctor. I don't know what you're a doctor of. You're demographic. Okay. A convention of Star Wars fans could be considered a group, right? A gathering of people in a specific place over a specific subject. You could call the people that come to, the Chicago City Star Wars Con or something a group. That'd be fine. You guys are talking about demographics. Skin colors do not represent groups. You keep vacillating between talking about the specificity of a particular aspect or culture or nation or something, but then you go right back to homogenizing everybody. Stop it.
Right. And like Jonathan mentioned, in our own groups, we have ideas about what it means to be Black or what Black people do or don't do.
Okay, if you're talking about your own social groups and things like that, okay, that's acceptable. I'm not quite. See, you'll forgive me if I keep jumping the gun a little bit because they're moving all over the place and what they're meaning to say and or what they say.
And so I think it's important that in that exposure to representation, I think it's important to try as best as you can to make sure that your kids are able to see and are exposed to other Black children or adults that are engaging in similar interests or that represent diversity in their gender expression or their sexual orientation or disability, just so that they don't feel like those intersectional things take a piece away from their race, or they can't be Black and this at the same time.
So again, the most beneficial thing you can do for your kids is make sure that at the very least, they are associating with people with their same skin color. The common denominator is skin color. And unifying everybody around skin color first and foremost. That there are so many ways to quote unquote be Black, even if you're disabled, even if you're a female, even if you're this, even if you're that. Or maybe just living your life as a person, an individual outside of your skin color. Like what, every disabled person is the same amongst their own skin color? What is that? What are you talking about?
And like you mentioned, like their Blackness is what it is to them. And, and we all have our different versions of that, even though there are certain, cultural things that we may share.
Like what? What is one thing that all Black people share? I'll take one. I mean, what is the number one thing, cultural thing that all Black people share no matter what? I would love to know, what is the unifying factor amongst anything else that could occur in someone's life? Like what?
Because a part of racial identity too is feeling, having a healthy relationship or feeling included in your group and not feeling like those other intersectional pieces about you kind of disqualify or chip away at your race.
Disqualify or chip away at your race. Okay, I made this, comparison in the last part, and I may do it again over the course of this, depending on what's said. But just imagine for a moment if everybody on this panel was a white person saying the exact same things fundamentally as they're saying here about being white. What kind of reception do you think that would get on the national stage, let's say? Like, change nothing about what they're saying except switch Black and or Latinx for white. And all of their advice about how to engender a positive racial identity in children who are white. Do you think that sounds like a healthy way to be?
So, the
Thank you,
Sadika. Thank you both. We're of course living at a time when race is on the degree to which it's explicit and explicitly on the agenda is obviously high, right?
Well, who's contributing to that? EmbraceRace? You better not be complaining about that, because that entire shtick is your bread and butter, if I'm not mistaken. And the entirety of this conversation so far has been focused on nothing but. So you better not be making that like a regrettable statement.
Right. It's true. It's there to a high degree. So
yeah,
when you think about Asian American violence, you think about the racialization of COVID,
You think about the social segregation that you're promoting. Yeah, and
very sharp racialization there.
Sharp racialization. What have you been promoting this entire time except racialization? Okay, for as much credit as I give them for holding their guests' relatively feet to the fire, now we're getting into the actual meat of what they're pushing here. I think you're not complaining about this, are you? This is what you are going for. This is what you're advocating for. Are you serious right now? I assume you must be. Holy cats. Thank you, Hell Triangle. But Mr. Scribe, sociology claims that BIPOC can't be racist. Only whites. Tell these people to go sit and twist. It is something, isn't it? It is something that, and it's not exactly a new thing. You just do a quick, transposition of words into the same thoughts and philosophies and check and see how would this sound if it was coming from a different direction. You know, does it sound like it has more or less merit if you just change up the abstracts but keep to the specific thrust of the philosophy? I mean, again, I shouldn't be surprised by this, but I am, I'm not always looking at the exact same subjects or speakers. So, okay, so you're complaining about the racialization going on in the country and the world, and engendering in children a positive racial identity, which requires or advises them to group with their own kind, does what to dispel those outcomes?
About voter suppression.
Voter suppression.
Black lives. I mean, it's really right. Police violence against Black and brown people.
Yeah, because police are never violent against anybody who's not Black and brown.
What, from your perspective, as folks, right, especially concerned about the development of healthy racial identity, what does it all mean? Right? What is happening right now? What special challenge, if any, do these phenomena ongoing, right, multiple layered, what do they pose to the challenge that those of us who cared for BIPOC kids have to face? Sadiq, let's stay with you.
Golly, I don't know. I guess continue promoting division and segregation. I guess that's the challenge it poses, is that, the very things you would complain about occurring are the things that you're encouraging effectively and will be the outcomes of what you're advocating for. Suspicion, separation, belief that anyone outside of your racial demographic is a threat or a stranger or should not be trusted or can't be communicated with effectively because their race is an inherent barrier. The stuff that you've been talking about for the last half hour of your talk.
Get some thoughts on that.
So I think, within the last year or so, specifically with the murder of George Floyd, I think that was a pivotal event in folks who either maybe weren't as interested before in racial and social justice, or companies, folks feeling like they need to at least address race or be able to name these things has become more prominent. Yeah, just like not Freddie Gray, Mike Brown, on and on. Every time something happens, no one thought about this before. Companies never paid attention to this before. I mean, I guess I just have the benefit of perspective to look back at all the previous panel discussions, which have had the exact same conversation, but using a previous scandal or outrage as the basis for pushing this stuff along. Yeah, every time something happens that is latched onto by opportunists and race baiters into being the new wedge point to make everybody hate each other even a little bit more. Yeah, it always becomes the new thing. And so I think that in some ways there'll be groups and spaces where folks are being more intentional about increasing their awareness or wanting to engage in these conversations. And then there's also those spaces where children and adults might encounter kind of folks that are maybe just kind of throwing out buzzwords and feeling like there's more of these things being brought up, but not necessarily engaged in a substantial way. So I think that
you want to chime in here, Jonathan, on just cavalcading buzzwords, maybe a little bit, Latinx, everything else. I mean, I cannot reproduce the absolute wall of verbal text that Jonathan gave us in the previous part, but
for kids, I think that it's influenced the level at which race and these things are being talked about more.
Yeah.
I think, previously folks were, we thought that we can't have these types of conversations. We can't talk about these things.
When was this? When couldn't we talk about these things? I want to hear when that was, because at least for the previous 10 years, and certainly for the 5 years that I've been doing YouTube, no one has stopped anyone from having, quote unquote, these conversations. No one. I have not seen it happen. They're constant. They're continuous. All the time. I keep being told, like, well, you have to have brave conversations. We have to have courageous conversations. Against what opposition? Nope. Sirens in the background. I don't know if you can hear those. All right.
In certain settings, or we shouldn't be talking to kids about race.
Yeah, you know what? I agree. We shouldn't be. We shouldn't be engendering in them a racial paranoia or a racial communion. Aren't we supposed to be moving past that? Oh, right by my window. Okay. Yeah, imagine that. What are you guys doing right here? Please, I'm waiting for you guys to explain to me, what is the benefit of highlighting skin color in children?
We need to wait until they're older. And so now I think that folks are talking about these things more, but I also think that brings more microaggressions and, people saying things that maybe aren't the right things to say, or folks are kind of digging or resisting against political correctness. And so there may be more overt racism where folks may before have felt a little embarrassed to make certain comments or say certain things. And
like suggesting that somehow Star Trek or Star Wars are not Latinx or not. I don't know. What kind of microaggressions are we talking about? All right. So talking more about race has the danger of talking or saying more microaggressions. Well, I got a thought. If we didn't emphasize race, then maybe we'd have fewer microaggressions. Doctor, it hurts when I move my arm like this.
So I think in some ways it's helped to kind of push things forward. And in other ways,
How?
I think it's brought out a more explicit and overt brand of racism. And
yeah, I'll agree with you that. I'll half agree with you with that. Push things forward? No, it hasn't. A new brand of racism? Yes. Because when I have smiling, happy educators glorifying to me their racial affinity group programs in their schools, their public schools, when I hear academics telling me that there is a benefit to having kids associate with their own kind as a positive step in self-identity. Yeah, no, it's a new brand of racism. But that's all it is. It's a new brand. It's still racism.
And has made those microaggressions be a little more prominent and sometimes more frequent.
Thank you, Sadika. Jonathan, I want to come to you on this one because, I'm thinking about your serving in the National Guard.
Okay.
Right. And wondering about, it certainly feels to me like there's something else goes on when, public officials are participating, right, in these explicit, racial stereotypes,
What?
hatred, antagonism, clearly based on race.
Like?
Shyla made a comment in the chat. She says, think about, right, what it means when a member of Congress is referred to as a terrorist, right, with no desire to reflect on the hateful rhetoric and bigotry. Do you have a sense of what it means when, yes, that kind of rhetoric comes with the sort of imprimatur of the federal government?
Like, if you're not voting for Joe Biden, you ain't black? Like that, you mean?
So,
I mean, I'm also kind of confused on Jonathan's behalf here. Are you asking Jonathan to speak about experiences he had in the National Guard from the federal government, or that is a hazy segue?
I'm trying to get at your questions.
Yeah, no, okay. And in this one, I'm on Jonathan's side. That question was all over the place, and connecting it to his National Guard service. Yeah, no, for everything else I've criticized Jonathan for to this point, I'm with him on this one. That was a goofy question.
So I think, so like from my perspective, the work that I do is for the National Guard is really, serving soldiers and families.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're as diverse as the communities that they get recruited from.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that sometimes that the general public doesn't always understand or appreciate that our service members can be low income, Caucasians, they can be middle income, African American, Latino, Latinx.
What? You mean the military will take anybody who's in some cases desperate enough to need a job and everything else, regardless of their skin color? Wow. Okay. So where are we going?
Soldiers.
Yeah.
And so for us, what we do is really bolster their resilience in the families that we serve, and looking at instilling more of those protective factors, just like we would the general public. Because if people want to point at the military, I always say, well, just look at your own communities, because 100% you will see our formations be reflective and look like most communities.
Yeah, and what is the unifying theme to all of those people, right? It's not their skin color, right? It's not where they came from necessarily, except for the country they're serving. It's the unified merit of putting their lives on the line and their time into protecting and serving the country and their communities, right? Right? There's something beyond race that they are putting forward, correct? So isn't that more a lesson in how to look past the inconsequential, just the window dressing of a person instead of what actually they do, the character of the person? Wouldn't that be a more guiding light towards going against all the stuff that you guys are talking about right now? So that experience of interacting with people from all walks of life, who all have come together under one, intention to be in the military, to work for their communities, to protect their country, and they come from all stripes, whether you're talking about poor, middle income, I don't know if wealthy happens that often, but I'm sure it does, and all races. Why then are you focusing so much on delineating people on the basis of race when we should be more, I guess, emphasizing connecting people on the basis of common interest or common cause? Things outside of the mere aesthetics of people.
Which may sometimes include folks that are racist and may not always have the, be living what we call the Army values, and they will not survive in our organization.
And I know I'm going out on a limb here. Are all of those such people white?
They always are kicked out or, prosecuted or found exited out of the organization because those things are not tolerated.
So, but otherwise, delineating and emphasizing race in children is fine. Training children to only congregate with their own kind is fine. But an adult in the military expressing such beliefs, that's not allowed. Okay.
In terms of your larger question around the federal government and what that means for holding accountability, the particular incident I think that you're referring to in terms of terrorism, the more recent one, to me, that's grassroots level advocacy of ownership for that congressperson. And it's our job in the BIPOC community to bring awareness.
Okay, I'm honestly unaware, or I've forgotten. Does anybody know what they're referring to as far as someone in Congress calling another person a terrorist? I mean, I can believe it happened. We've had similar things happen back and forth on both sides of the aisle since 9/11. You know, you're unpatriotic, or you're helping the enemy, or you're a friend of the terrorists, and that kind of stuff. So I can believe it happened. I don't know what specific incident they're referring to here. Thank you, Point Curation, popping in to say and wish all is well for all. Well, thank you, Point. Hope all is well with you as well. If you got your Etsy link, which I always never have in front of me, put in the chat, and I'll post it up there for your art so people can know about your art. Let's see. Okay, Deco says Marjorie Taylor Greene called Omar a terrorist for several reasons. Okay. All right, so Ilhan Omar. Okay, thank you guys. Okay, I don't know. I mean, obviously this just happened, and I'm not reading the news every night, so I don't keep up on every little detail or scandal. All right. So Marjorie Taylor Greene called Ilhan Omar a terrorist. All right.
And to elevate our level of engagement around voter turnout, countering voter suppression, having real dialogues around importance of holding people accountable.
Where was the voter suppression when, Biden got 81 million votes or whatever it was? I mean, the voter suppression efforts must be pretty lousy if you guys got your way, right? Or am I missing something?
And I really want to tie this back to what Sadiqa was talking about, because there's a lot of buzzwords and there's not a lot of authentic engagement around how change can happen. We all
Who was using buzzwords a lot and just going off into la la land in the last part, Jonathan? Come on now. You guys have been nothing but buzzwords.
Talk about being woke and having different perspectives on things, but when it comes down to actively engaging at a community level, that may mean showing up and showing out for community conversations on race or voter suppression. It may mean that you're online with us right now for this Embrace the Race conversation. So I think that there are real opportunities to hold people in power accountable.
How? In what? Give me an example. I mean, I'm willing to entertain an example. You keep downplaying the idea of buzzwords and just like glossing over things, but yet you won't give me any specifics. Showing up to conversations about. Okay, well, how would you hold someone accountable? What would you do?
But we have to be very intentional ourselves.
Look, you're going against the buzzword thing, and yet you're using nothing but buzzwords. Be intentional. Be your authentic self. Show up. Get woke. Come on, man. It's so blatantly, transparently bad.
Be very strategic in how we do that.
Very strategic. I'm sorry for my pause game here. It is very frustrating to hear somebody try to say that buzzwords aren't helping anything. We need to get away from those, and then use nothing but buzzwords and corporate speak.
We can't just cancel them on Twitter or at Instagram and hope that they go away.
Then what are you going to do?
So I think the best power that we can have as a people is to get people at the voter box, be engaged, advocate, and just really push back in a way that's I think that there is certainly a more bolstered and in your face type racism that I had not seen my entire life.
Yeah, you know what? I'll agree with you, Jonathan. I have seen some more in your face racism in the last 5 years alone than I've seen in my entire life. And I'm looking at part of it right now. Just part of it. I mean, the worst I've seen is the grinning educators telling me of the benefits of racial affinity groups in public schools. That's probably one of the worst and scariest. But you guys are doing no better. Are you listening to yourself right now? Have you listened to anything that you guys have been saying and pushing this whole time? The very name of the organization you are speaking to right now, Embrace Race. Why?
I saw it in microaggressions growing up, but I think the boldness is very interesting now.
I'll admit, the boldness is interesting. The boldness to take ideas that were better left in the dustbin of history, brushing off the dust and repackaging it as woke and progressive. Yeah, no, I'll give you, I am quite amazed at the boldness of it and the seeming lack of opposition from people that you would think would be opposed to this kind of stuff. Thank you, Keeverdam. Point posted the link. Oh, sorry. I missed it. There it is. Let me do that. And there you go. Okay, thank you, Keeverdam. So should be appearing here momentarily, hopefully. The link to Point Curation's artwork on his Etsy store. There we go. Take a look at that if you're looking for some original art at ridiculously affordable prices. But with that, let's go back into it.
So
okay.
Hope that answered your question, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, again, to Jonathan's defense, that question was all over the place, but whatever your answer was, Jonathan, really didn't explain anything all by itself either way.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
So
okay.
we're going to go to questions because we have so many of them.
Okay.
I know some of you have started to put them in the Q&A
Yay.
folder here on Zoom. On Facebook, we can also take some of your questions. But I'm wondering, just looking at the questions that have came in before we started, there's a great question from Susan. How can parents engage their children's teachers in actively supporting the development of positive self-identity in their BIPOC children?
Oh, well, obviously racial affinity groups and, leveling all the test scores because like in Oregon and other places, we have to reduce the requirements in math in order to benefit students of color, because obviously students of color can't achieve at the regular standards. So we have to, and if anybody listening to this in the future is thinking I'm making that up, that's been happening. That's been happening in state legislatures and things, particularly in the west coast of the country, for at least the last year or two. Where they're actively lowering math standards specifically to assist students of color or, various terms thereof. Yeah, that's what teachers can do, right?
And yeah, I think it's a great question that maybe Sadika, would you like to start with that?
Yeah.
One?
Sure. I think, I think that parents can advocate and push teachers to do things like, have assignments or times where students are able to highlight things about their own culture or do, reports, presentations.
Okay, you're not talking about culture. For someone who has a doctor in front of their name, and I don't know what our speaker does professionally, but let's make sure we have our terms correct here. Race, specifically skin color, does not equate to culture, and culture does not necessarily define what someone's race is. All right. Group is not the same as demographic. Can we at least agree to stop munging these words together as though they are the same things? Right? Like racist and bigot. These are not the same things. They are completely different concepts. Emphasizing culture in the classroom, like, I don't know, like, foods from different countries. Okay, sure. All right. Because you could have Polish food, and you could have German food. You could have Spanish food. You could have Mexican food. These delineate between cultures, right? But they all come, one to the other, from people who probably look relatively similar to one another, right? Because culture is not race. Thank you again, Hell Triangle. I ask this question each week. How do charter schools in Harlem get blacks to outperform Asians? By making them study and actually do their homework. It's amazing, isn't it? If you take someone on and say, you know, they have as much potential as anybody else in the classroom, regardless of what they look like. It depends on what standards you hold and how much you get them to work towards those standards. If you don't come into a classroom and assume this demographic needs special help or needs a gentler approach because of what they look like, you might be surprised as to what you get, right? I mean, wasn't this one of the lessons? You guys remember that old movie? It's old now, but it wasn't old when I was young. Stand and Deliver, right? Or Dangerous Minds, right? Or any of these other movies where the whole plot of the thing is, and Stand and Deliver, I think, is a much better telling of this kind of story. You have someone come in who has a group of kids who have already been dismissed because of how they act or where they come from or whatever else, and the teacher holds them to account and makes them responsible for their own futures and well-being and everything else. And you see, as the story generally goes, that they meet and or exceed the marks put in front of them if you have someone who believes in them as people and does not look at them as a stereotype. Right? Okay. You know, depending on the telling of the story, it can sometimes be fanciful. It can sometimes be, on reflection, a little old-fashioned, depending on how the characters interact and so on, and, you know, comical. But either way, that is usually the time-tested story, right? Imagine that. Imagine just like saying, I'm going to believe that you can do this, and I'm going to hold you accountable for your own well-being and challenge you to better yourself, regardless of what you look like. Is that such an alien concept at this point?
About and sharing those cultural historical facts and accomplishments and things in the classroom.
And so what? Historical cultural accomplishment. So are the children of today supposed to what? Feel pride in the accomplishments of people from the past based on that person's race? Okay, well then, why is there such a opposition and why is there such a scandal over schools teaching of the accomplishments and or discoveries, etc., of people on the basis of their whiteness? Why is it bad for some kids, but a positive step for others to emphasize race in one's own personal identity and pride, historically or, you know, contemporaneously? Right? What?
So push for those type of activities to help the other students learn more about the person's culture and for that child to be able to positively highlight and represent themselves. Earlier, I had mentioned things like, you know, including diverse names in your assignments and questions, and in the artwork and things that are displayed inside the classroom itself. And so I think, you know, in the same way that parents advocate and push for other services or supports for their kids, I think that you can also, bring forth some practical examples or suggestions for those teachers as well, and know that might not be received, right? And you might have to, you might need to do it at home, but I think it's good to suggest and to push gently, maybe, to have those things included in the classroom as well.
Right. So you want in the classroom a focus on race. In the classroom, in the public school classroom, you want teachers to keep an eye on race in considerations of lesson plans, student interaction, decorations in the room, and so on. Let's just sit with that for a moment. Just like with racial affinity groups and everything else. How is that not tempting a giant leap backwards in the promise of the progress that was laid out in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and subsequent legislation and the Education Acts and so on? Why would you want to risk that as a matter of school policy, that you're going to highlight children on the basis of their race or denigrate others on the basis of theirs? Can you not game this out 5 steps ahead, just a little? What this implies. Well, not even implies. I mean, the name of this organization is EmbraceRace.
And I love that in early childhood spaces, oftentimes there are these units about the family, you know, like my family, which is a great opportunity, right? Especially if you have a diverse classroom and the teachers can bring stuff in as well to really talk about different cultures in a really organic way. A thing we like to say a lot is that you're the expert in your own child. And I think another thing sort of related to our previous conversation about how diverse we are between groups and within groups.
You're the expert in your own child. Okay. So what in the name of all that is holy are you guys doing here, being advisors to people on how they can improve their family lives around race? Oh, you know, your child does not have a positive racial identity. They're not talking about race all the time. They're hanging out with people who aren't of their own race. That's not very healthy for their self-identity. Come on.
Is really trying to bring the child's whole identity into the classroom, you know, what they like, what their temperament's like, as well as sort of the cultural stuff to sort of try to safeguard teachers from, in this moment, only thinking of your kid as their race.
What the safeguard? What did you guys just say? Are you nuts? Safeguard teachers from thinking of your child only as their race. What has this entire thing been about so far? What have your own speakers been saying one after the other that you've agreed with and nodded along for all of your good questioning and trying to force them to give a clear answer? Are you kidding me right now? Are you kidding me right now? You have nodded and smiled and said yes every time either one of these people has suggested that kids need to be around people who look like them, and the people who are in charge of these kids need to emphasize at home or abroad the race the child possesses. And now you're trying to safeguard teachers from looking at children only as their race? Well, here's a thought. Here's a crazy thought. I know. This is just a wacky idea. Hey, how about making race an irrelevancy in your interaction and assessment of one to another? How's about that? Is that crazy? Boy, am I in La La Land right now saying that? Oh, geez, Louise. I mean, I don't know. The content of one's character over the color of their skin. Can you imagine going at that direction? Oh, boy.
Right. I think is important. Jonathan, would you add to that? To what you've seen in Head Start classrooms, or what you would?
I think all those things that Sadiqa talked about. You know, we in Head Start are, you know, that's how we are in terms of just integral to who we were in terms of programming. Of making sure that if you have a dual language classroom, that there's sight words, that there's shared experiences, that like you talked about, Melissa, the early education settings are always very good about engaging around what does my family look like. The other thing that before we all kicked this off, Andrea and I talked about, was the idea that Head Start used to we grow our own, what we call grow our own, which you know, we would recruit parents to become teachers' aides, and And if they stay with us long enough, sometimes they even turn into teachers and,
Okay.
Work their way through the program. And so we're very proud of that as a history of being Head Start parents and
Wait, grow our own? Grow our own. Okay. Are you just talking about like parents of students in the classrooms, or is your selection process of who to encourage to participate get a little bit more granular when you say grow our quote unquote own? I'd love to know the answer to that question.
engaging in the program. And as a Head Start dad, I will tell you that I learned so much from other parents during those opportunities of sharing storybooks from different racial groups who were part of
demographics. I know I keep harping on this, but words are important. Definitions are important when you're talking about what you're talking about. A race is not a group. All Black people are not a group. I know I don't need to keep explaining this, but it is so infuriating to watch educated grown adults pushing the idea that race equals sameness amongst all people who look that way. Okay? I mean, the entire idea of unifying people on the basis of race in the first place is a disgusting thought. And if you don't think it's a disgusting thought, well, you tell me about white power and white pride, and tell me how positive and beneficial a notion that has been to human history, and specifically American history. All right? Races are not groups. They're not. They're demographics. Please.
Our classroom, refugee families, you name it. And it was shared in family style dining, which was you get around the table with the little ones and you share a meal or whatever it is. And all those opportunities to live and taste and talk about race of your classmates, and for little ones to embrace that is very, very
creepy, insidious. I don't know what adjective would you like to put in there? Real quick, and I know you're joking. Ryan R says "quote unquote" grown adults. No, I know, but here's the thing: I don't say that in an ironic way or in a satirical way. These are grown adults. These are people who are interacting with children. I mean, it's not some kind of fluke, right? I mean, our speakers here aren't representative of some, fringe way of thinking or something. They are grown adults, and they are accountable for their actions. They're not victims of somebody telling them what to do at this point. They're choosing to do this. So as much as I can hold a grown adult as responsible for whatever they do and say of their own volition, I do the same here. Thank you, Mr. Tickletrunk. This is a scam. A human's identity is the most malleable aspect about us, yet there is never any work to address this fact of our psychology. Yeah, how you define yourself. There was a, what was it? I haven't actually watched the movie, but Rocket Man, the sort of biopic about Elton John. I saw a clip on YouTube a few days ago, and I guess it's early on in his life where he's talking to some, at least at that point, some famous singer or someone that he admires. And he's trying to figure out from this guy, like, how do you do this or whatever else? And the famous person, the celebrity, looks at him and says, you have to kill the person you're supposed to be and be the person you want to be. I might be slightly misquoting that, but that's effectively the message. And self-definition, right? You hear that phrase a lot of the time. Someone like goes off to reinvent themselves, right? Take on a new perspective, a new persona. I've seen it in my real life. Somebody that I knew at one point in time, and then I meet them 5 or 10 years later, and either through personal experience or personal hardship or just force of will, they're a completely different person. You know, one of the more dramatic things I've seen, I mean, both in the person themselves and just literally physically themselves, is someone who I knew at one point in time who was decidedly overweight, right? And then, circumstances changed, life shifts and everything. And I didn't have contact with this person for many years. Now, this person at the time that I knew them, they were, physically in one way, and personality wise, they were relatively shy, kind of awkward, that kind of thing. Okay. Jump forward, I think it was like 7 or 8 years or something. And I happened upon them at a sort of by accident kind of thing at a social gathering. And I hadn't seen them in so long that it took me a moment to recognize them, because not only had they changed physically, they were ridiculously fit, right? And as soon as I started talking to them, it was a whole different person. If I had just walked in the room and didn't have any other point of reference, I would not have known that person was there, because they were so different. They had found a new confidence about themselves. They had put the work into it. It wasn't one of those things where they had like one of those surgeries that shrinks your stomach or whatever. They actually put the work into it. They found a new ethic for themselves, and they were a completely different person. Now, that being said, I think that self-confidence had bled over a little bit into arrogance in some places. So it's not necessarily a 100% positive change, but yeah, you can change your entire self, your identity, your behavior, your personality of your own volition, or things could happen to you that do that to you. We have seen people who have had brain injuries where they've had, they've lost their memory and had to rebuild their life, or they've just completely altered their behavior for better or worse on the basis of a brain injury. Yes, identity, behavior, personality, these things are malleable. Whatever may be permanent of your outside covering, it says nothing about who you are. I've used this example too many times, but I'll do it one more time. A bearded man who's a carpenter, right? Okay, am I talking about Jesus Christ, or am I talking about serial killer Israel Keys? Doesn't matter, does it?
Life altering, because what we're doing for
life altering. Well, I suppose if you're going to sit around a table and emphasize to other parents the importance of race, and then they, for some reason, impart that notion back onto their kids, yeah, that can be life altering. It could be.
brain development, right, is all those little things firing up in the brain, of brain connections around language. And
what
if they're tactile learners, if they're auditory learners.
What does that have to do with skin color? Tell me what any of that has to do with skin color. Language, tactile, what?
As they taste things, it really changes how children will remember those things growing up. And I think that for teachers, if they want to have the authentic opportunity to engage around race, is to be vulnerable in a way that that is going to open you up. And it's dangerous to tell a teacher that, right? And especially not so much early childhood, because they're little, the little ones, but as a age.
Whoa. Okay, I don't know if they've said it. If they said in the first part and I missed it, but I'm genuinely curious. What is the appropriate age to begin instilling in children a positive racial identity? I mean, I asked this in the abstract because I don't know that they've said or that they will say, but okay, he said not in like small children. Okay, well, when do you start? What is the appropriate time in a child's development to emphasize to them the importance and necessity of focusing on their race?
Into first, second, third grade, and later developmental years of early childhood.
Okay, so first grade is the appropriate time to start doing that. So about 6, thereabouts.
That's when it can really become more challenging for teachers to become vulnerable and to really open up to parents and to their students to bring those things into the classroom.
Yeah, gosh, why would a teacher be hesitant to bring race into the classroom? Why would a public school teacher be hesitant to bring race into a public classroom? Oh, I don't know. Brown v. Board of Education, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Education Amendments of 1976. I don't know. Why would they be hesitant to do that? And then tell me why so many teachers are completely cool with it in racial affinity groups.
And then also, you want to arm those teachers with support. I always tell parents, sometimes administrators don't always, there's politics at the local level related to race right now.
There's also politics at the national, federal level in law. But hey, who cares about those, right?
You all alluded to that. And I think that here in Arizona, we saw it play out in the teaching of Chicano studies. At some
Chicano studies? No. You said Chicanx last time. You just did a microaggression. Do you understand that?
of our high schools, and which has been banned. There was legislation around it. So even understanding your own cultural roots of the Southwest here in Arizona is now been put into legislation and banned. So
wait, is that true? I don't know. Teaching banned? Okay, we went over that really quick. So teaching cultural, what is banned in Arizona?
So I think that the more that we can do to counter that and supporting teachers who want to pursue conversations around race, integrate storytelling, literature, any of those kinds of components into the classroom. I always tell parents, please show up for those teachers willing to be vulnerable on behalf of their students and all of you.
Show up for teachers who are willing to acquiesce to pressure to teach race in classrooms. If there was such a teacher who'd be willing to do that, that is a teacher I would not be very supportive of, but that's maybe just me.
And just be there to support them, because they may not always have the support of their principal or their superintendent.
Why wouldn't they? Tell me why such a teacher would not have the support of the principal or the superintendent. Even if you disagree with the principal and the superintendent, what would be the principal or the superintendent's argument against such things? Like, what exactly is the opposition to this idea? You need to tell us what it is, and you need to tell us how you're going to counter it philosophically or otherwise. Why would they be concerned?
So
yeah, thank you for that, Jonathan. You know, the at the beginning of this program, we mentioned the Color Brave early childhood community.
Oh yes, Color Brave. That's right. I've forgotten about that. Tell us about Color Brave.
For caregivers to BIPOC children, right? So birth through 8.
So BIPOC children need special caregivers based on the fact that the kids are okay.
And we mentioned it specifically in the context of some affinity groups that will be launching in January, and for which you can now apply essentially starting now.
Raise the roof, Jonathan, really? Affinity groups. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Yeah, okay, great.
So I'm going to, again, put that in the chat. But the reason I'm raising it now is because last fall, when we were conducting research or gauging people's interest in having such a community focused on that population, one of the things that came up, and this is a little bit of a flip side to what we've been saying, one of the things a lot of parents, BIPOC parents of BIPOC children in particular said, fairly often was, yes, on one hand, we want educators, white and non-white, to have these conversations with our children. On the other hand, we're concerned about the damage that such conversations could do when teachers of any stripe are not prepared to have them.
Yeah. So, gosh, how could you solve that problem? How could you avoid the possible, pitfalls or misunderstandings or stereotypes or assumptions and categorizations? How could how could you avoid the fallout of bringing up race in the classroom? Gosh, it's a mystery.
So, we have someone asking exactly this question. How do we caution well-meaning allies against jumping into conversations with children that they're not equipped to navigate? I'm actually not sure if there refers to the children or to the allies, the adult allies.
Oh, allies. Yes. Tell us about allies. What constitutes an ally? I mean, I'm assuming it would be someone who is not of the race of the child they are talking to. That's my guess, because obviously they are unequipped to have such a conversation on the very nature of their skin color. That's my assumption. I wonder if we'll hear.
But can you speak to the essential competencies that adults should have before trying to do that and possibly doing damage?
Yes.
So, Sadika, can you say a little bit about that?
Yes. Okay. So what knowledge, what tools, what perspectives should someone possess in order to have a correct and healthy and non-damaging conversation with a classroom of children about race?
Sure. So I think it's really important that whether it's educators, parents, even whomever is interested or engaging in these conversations, you also have to do your own internal work, right? So you need to make sure that, outside of those spaces where you are, that you are learning about other cultures, that you are identifying what your own biases are, to learn more about different areas of bias that you might have that may be unconscious. And so I think it's important that in order to be able to be effective or to leave a positive impact in having these conversations, you have to increase your own awareness.
Okay, so go educate yourself. I mean, I've heard that over and over again for the last 5 years as well. So anyone, first and foremost, before they engage in this kind of thing, go educate yourself. Okay. I don't know about you, but in general terms in life, when it comes to my flaws, outright or otherwise, I'm usually my own worst witness. So if I'm tasked with going out to find my own biases on things, not quite sure how that works. But either way, okay, so I'm a generic person in an educational position, let's say, one way or the other. And before I can talk to my class about quote unquote race, I need to go educate myself on cultures.
Internally, so about yourself and your own stuff that you have going on, but also the way that.
Ooh, you mean like critical reflective practices? Oh, we learned about that a couple of shows back.
You educate yourself and expose yourself in your own personal circles, and professionally, so that you don't feel yourself like a fraud or phony in having these conversations.
So the metric is I need to go out and educate myself about whatever up to the point where I don't feel like a fraud. Okay, that sounds very specific.
And that you aren't kind of walking the walk as well.
What are you even talking about? So, as long as I feel confident enough to speak to children about race, I'm in good shape. Okay.
So, Sadika, let me actually follow up on that, because I imagine that right now it's one thing if you're a parent and your main child audience is your own child, right, or your own children. But if you're in the classroom and you're dealing with other people's children, right, which is also to say that one constituency you have are the parents of those children.
Yes.
Some of whom, and we know about the environment we live in now, right? This so-called anti-CRT backlash, which is largely a backlash against, right, taking race seriously, both in the present and in U.S. history, and teaching our children.
No. Okay, you do not know what CRT is. I mean, have a little series I did not too long ago. A bunch of educators in a college in Oregon talking about critical race theory and how it is applied to education and how they teach it back in 2010, before all this stuff happened. The only glaring embarrassment of that for myself is that I did not know how to say the name Du Bois and kept correcting the speakers, which I feel like a complete moron now after the fact, of course, but otherwise, that entire series tells you about what CRT is. And what you're saying is not what CRT is. You guys, in effect, are promoting CRT in this talk. I don't know if you realize it, but you are, because the same elements that I have heard from critical race theorist proponents and diversity in the classroom proponents, which is part and parcel with the same thing, is like shall only congregate with like. Merge race and culture into the same notion. You know, I've never seen any of our speakers here before this talk, but I have heard their words over and over and over again from multiple places.
Which is to say then that you know that anything you say, right, even if you feel quite confident and you're doing a good job, and perhaps we would agree, means that you could be confronted by, you know, by peers, by administrators, by community members, etc.
Well, that's what you risk when putting out any idea into the public square. Criticism, challenge, question. That's part of a healthy communication and quote unquote conversation, is it not?
If you're just starting out, you're starting to do that work. You know, and of course, even folks who've done the work for a long time and do it well often wish we had done better. I wish I'd said something different. I wish, etc.
Yes.
So at what point, how do you know, especially at a time when it's safer professionally for many people to just not engage these conversations about race, identity, justice, etc. How do you think about, well, this is the time to step off, to take that chance, and to trust that when I know better, I'll do better?
Well, if you're talking about professionally, if your principal and or superintendent would be opposed to it, you might be putting your professional life at risk. But yes, okay, how do you know when it's safe to start introducing race into spheres that might run up against, I don't know, federal law?
So I think that these conversations have an inherent level of risk.
No,
right? And
really?
If you're going to engage this work, you are taking on a risk.
Yeah, you know, by saying that any kid in your classroom who looks a particular way needs special help, or any kid in the classroom looks a different way doesn't. Yeah.
Of how that might be perceived or how it might land with other folks or pushback that you might get for doing so. I don't know that there's a time where you feel because, so race is one area, but because diversity and culture are so intersectional,
what were you saying about buzzwords earlier? And you just told us that when you don't feel like you're a fraud anymore, I mean, there is a point at which you're safe in doing it, right? Or isn't there?
The work has to be ongoing, right? So there's always going to be maybe populations or different diversity variables that you aren't an expert on, right? Like you can't know everything about everything, and you're going to make faux pas and mistakes.
Oh, you mean microaggressions and racist comments? Because all it takes is for someone in the classroom or some teacher or some parent to brand you with those words, and then you're sunk. Faux pas? I would love to see, and I'm sure it's happened, where someone accuses someone else of having committed a microaggression, and they just say, I made a faux pas, and then see what the reaction to that dismissal is.
But I think you have to be honest about where you are with the people that you're speaking with.
What?
Honest about with yourself.
What does that mean?
And being okay to be the student. So if someone else has to correct you about a mistake that you made, to be humble and to understand and to communicate that you made that mistake, and you can, you're gonna make effort to not continue to do that.
Well, but if someone points out to me a mistake or a microaggression or whatever else, wouldn't I feel like a fraud talking about this at that point? Don't I have to stop and not do it anymore because I'm obviously not prepared? Do you know the professional ramifications of being branded a racist or a bigot or conducting microaggressions these days? Have you seen the student backlash against organizations, colleges, professors, and so on when they're accused of doing such things? Do you really want to roll the dice with this in this day and age? And again, I ask, to what benefit?
But I think you have to be, one, honest with yourself, with the people that you're speaking to about where you are, understanding that it's an ongoing process, and that you'll never be in a place where maybe, you are completely comfortable.
Yes, because original sin can never be washed off. It can only be apologized for.
And all the time, because again, this stuff is risky and it's controversial.
Why is that? Why is that? Are you guys at all, at any point, I don't expect that they are, there's only like 8 minutes left in this thing, at all going to at least mention the specificity or the tone of the opposition to these things and address that? At least acknowledge the opposition and give it a fair description, and then explain why that side is wrong or why your way is better. Because I don't feel like this is a conversation. This feels like a lecture. And I know it might seem, simplified to say that, but all the same, that's one of the frustrating things about some of these panels is that they will not even come on to entertain what the opposition is and what the opposition has to say to these things and how they would answer that.
Kind of no matter the time period. And so maybe there'll be a time where it gets a little bit less controversial and then there'll be something else. And so you kind of have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Oh, come on. How many times have we heard that one?
I think.
Yeah, that explains everything. You can just end your answer there. I mean, everybody knows what that means.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you,
Yeah.
Sadiq. And I want to, let's see, where'd you go? Want to plug the Color Brave community again as a place to have those conversations, a relatively safe place where it's understood that we're all there because we're learning.
Relatively?
And we want to get better.
Relative to what?
There's I'll come to you, Jonathan, in just a moment. There's a question about interested in learning why the Color Brave groups are broken out by color.
That's a good question. Yeah, tell us why the Color Brave groups are broken out by color. Tell us why an organization called EmbraceRace is so focused on skin color. I'm very curious if Andrew will answer this one. Why are the Color Brave groups split out by color?
Since I mentioned racial affinity groups.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, no, you just said affinity groups prior to this. I don't think you specified racial affinity groups. I was waiting for you to do so. Because, when you just say affinity groups, it could be Star Wars fans. But no, okay, racial affinity groups. Yes, tell us about those.
And the short answer, maybe a two-part answer is, one, a lot of people have asked for that.
A lot of people have asked for racial segregation. Okay.
And I think it's fair to say that a lot of our members have asked for that.
A lot of the members of your organization have asked for racial segregation. Okay.
And they've asked for that, at least in part because, in fact, the circumstances of different groups, while there's tremendous diversity within group, as we noted earlier,
demographics,
the circumstances of different group are somewhat different.
The circumstances of different groups are somewhat different. The circumstances of different demographics is somewhat different. So not everyone is exactly the same because of their skin color, you say?
Right, and there are quite a few people who feel more comfortable and feel that there's a tremendous amount to gain speaking with others who are similarly situated.
Similar situated? You're not talking about circumstance. You're not talking about situation. You're talking about skin color. Skin color is not a circumstance. Skin color is not a situation. unless you decide to define it as one.
Relatively speaking.
Relatively speaking. Oh, okay. Relative to what?
I should also note, though, that over time, as we get more and more people, as we expect more and more people to want to engage in these conversations, that racial affinity groups will absolutely not be the only vehicle, right, for having these conversations.
They shouldn't be a vehicle at all. If you actually mean what you say you are trying to achieve, well, no, I take it back. You're actually trying to achieve exactly what you're saying. I mean, hell, you should be all for racial affinity groups based on what Sadika said and what Jonathan has said about the benefits of being with your own kind. I mean, why aren't racial affinity groups your primary tool? But okay, what would be another vehicle to achieve even greater benefits than racial affinity groups?
We also know that there are people, for example, who want to sit down with others who are not like themselves.
Oh my God, what? What possible advantage could there be in that? I mean, I've just been told chapter and verse how it's just the greatest thing ever to be amongst your own kind. And even if you live in a neighborhood that doesn't have people who look like you really should go to those barber shops where everybody looks like you. Wow. Okay. What a novel idea.
Which is a thing we don't often get opportunity to do.
Talking to people not like you is something you don't often have an opportunity to do. Well, I mean, Sadika could talk to her neighbors. Her neighbors who don't look like her. But she's encouraging people to avoid that and instead focus explicitly on skin color. Have you been listening to your own presentation?
In many spaces in this country. So we hope it will be true over time that there will be more and more spaces differently constituted to meet everyone's needs.
But yet you're promoting racial affinity groups, first and foremost. Instead of finding common threads through people, you are differentiating everyone on the basis of race, first and foremost. That is not an answer. That is not an answer to the question. Well, I mean, I'll take it back. No, that is an answer to the question, but you haven't told us why that is somehow greatly more beneficial than just meeting one another as people and not as skin colors. And suggesting that doing so is some kind of novel idea that maybe we'll get to at some point. Like, really?
Right.
Right.
So we don't have very much more time, but I wonder if there are specific resources that you all are using, maybe books or a show you actually like.
Sure. Tell me about a TV show or
you're
a book.
using with kids in your life.
Yeah. What books or shows can I show to kids for this? Nobody jump on it.
I think Jonathan's muted, so maybe he's thinking about it.
Yeah, I think they're all thinking about it because they have no idea.
Sadika, I wonder if you have something to recommend.
Yeah, what's a good children's book or children's show to emphasize race to children?
Yeah, so, we've been talking a lot about media books that are representative of your race. I think for Black kids, there's lots of books that...
Please tell me about Anti-Racist Baby. Please tell me about Anti-Racist Baby. Or the kids' version of Stamped from Our Beginnings or something? Please tell me it's one of those books.
That serve that purpose. So and incorporate affirmations. So books like I Am, positive affirmations for brown boys.
I Am, positive affirmations for brown boys. Never heard of it.
By Aisha Rodriguez.
What? Wait, positive affirmations for brown boys from. Okay.
Jasmine Wright has a book called I'm Gonna Push Through that talks about resilience. Books like Cool Cuts that display or showcase different types of haircuts, or My Name is Unique Like Me.
My name is unique like me. Yeah. But we're not talking about names and uniqueness. We're talking about homogenizing people on the basis of skin color. What possible benefit could that book have just based on its title?
Are just a few different books that can all be found on Amazon that can help to kind of improve or bolster that racial identity, but also help to include some of that representation.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations of books to help improve a white kid's racial identity? I mean, you must have something on your book list to cover all the bases, right? Right, because that would be a positive thing to introduce into a child's life if they're white. I mean, there shouldn't be some kind of difference there, right?
That's great, and we'll make those titles available. And we also at EmbraceRace have a lot of titles to suggest as well.
Oh, I'm sure at EmbraceRace you've got a lot of material to suggest to push forward the idea of embracing race in a color brave fashion.
Well, I want to make one quick suggestion, sort of for older kids, but Colin in Black and White, Ava DuVernay's Netflix series at 6.
Oh, Ava DuVernay, yes. As we know, also a very, very strong proponent of unity and brotherhood and kinship amongst people of all types. Yes.
I think great for families, sort of maybe 10 and up, for talking about some of these subtleties of race. Really recommend it.
Yeah. Jonathan, give us the Disney Channel.
Anything?
Jonathan?
So I think that there's so many opportunities, and
now that you gave Jonathan an opportunity to Google some books, titles, and things.
In terms of for the Latinx community, there's lots of books out there.
Yeah, like
Turning Pages is one of them. What you can do with the butt at the classic Upstairs, Downstairs, and Anna. There's just a whole host of books that.
Yeah, there are a lot of books. Are these ones that you have read to your own children? I mean, since you're such a proponent of this and you have kids yourself, right?
They're either bilingual or rich in cultural heritage and history of family makeup, multi-generational family stuff. In terms of newer shows or any of that, I will be honest, I am not a huge consumer of new shows. I am an avid reader, and I always recommend to my youth. I will hand them Gloria Anzaldua's Borderlands book, which is a classic. The forefront of discussions around intersectionality.
I mean, it may be just something with a similar title. Wasn't there like a Netflix series called Borderlands that was either based around that? I could be mistaken.
And so early Bell Hooks work is
Bell Hooks. Oh yeah, Bell Hooks. Boy, oh boy. Feminist legend Bell Hooks.
Well, because I think those works are easily interpreted and digestible, and sometimes, and that's going to be for your teen years, right? Like I'd say like 12 to obviously college years, but 13. I know some of the topics are a little bit dicey depending on content, but if parents really want to start looking at intersectionality and what that means within the Latinx community, and
what intersectionality means within the Latinx community. What does intersectionality mean in the Latinx community? Because intersectionality was originally created to describe the overlapping oppressions of Black women. So what does intersectionality mean in the Latinx community? Gender
and some of those kinds of nuanced pieces, those things are critical.
Okay.
Don't get me started down the road of intersectionality and what that means.
I would love for you to describe to me exactly what intersectionality means to the Latinx community. But you don't want them to get you started, so I guess we're not going to get there.
Or Latinx community, it's been talked about, for years, and I think that within even the feminist movement, there's been a strong support around that work to really enlighten youth and what that means for us as a Latinx community. So
What does the feminist movement intersectionality have to do with the Latinx community made up of not just women? I would love to know the answer to that question, but we're not going to get it.
I wish I had all night with you all.
Yeah.
It's fun.
The time always goes quickly.
Yeah.
We want to thank everyone in the chat who's sharing lots of resources too. We'll try to share some of those when we send this out. Thank you so much. Always too short.
We will have, as always, you will, anyone who wasn't able to catch it, any of your friends, colleagues, families who might want to see this, we'll have it freely available.
Yes,
very soon. We'll have a transcript. We'll have materials.
Great.
Jonathan and Sadika have both graciously created some action guides that will be supportive
action guides
of what they're talking about tonight.
Okay.
And thank you both so much.
Yes.
Not only for tonight, but for the work you do.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for hosting us. This is great.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And that's the end. There you go. There we have from EmbraceRace, an organization I never heard of before until now. One that I may have to revisit in the future just to see what else they have to say. Scary and insidious. Those are the two words that I think constantly came up in my mind, and I think I've been said a couple of times over the course of this presentation. Is the again, if you just take what they're saying at face value and switch out Black and or Latinx with white in every reference, and then actually listen to what is being promoted about emphasizing race and racial identity, racial affinity groups, and on and on and on, and you turned around and took that exact same transcript and played it for anybody in their own communities, and I'm talking about communities of thought, not communities of race, they would have such an opposition to those notions, first and foremost, based entirely on what? On the race of the people being emphasized, right? No doubt. No doubt if you had 4 white people sitting there saying the exact same things about white racial identity and pride, it would be a scandal, and rightfully so, because we're supposed to be moving past this crap at this point. Or I thought so. But no, it has to be here. It has to be emphasized. It has to be talked about and underscored and taught to children in perpetuity. And even when in their own rhetoric they stumble over contradictions of purpose, they smile and move on. EmbraceRace, color brave. Kind of tells you everything you need to know. And imagine if either one of these organizations were run by old white guys and you knew nothing else about the organization. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I'll take a couple minutes here for any comments, and then I'm going to wrap up because I've gone past my time to make sure I get all of this in one show. Let's see. Kieverdam says, I wish I had all night with you all. Oh, that's what Jonathan said. You're not saying that to the rest of the chat. Okay, well, I'm just making sure. That's fine. Let's see. For the win nil, I'll just cite Fox and watch their heads explode just for the hell of it. Hey, I suppose you could. Let's see. Arc 210, there's no money and power in moving past it. No, I know. I mean, I was being a bit facetious. I know. I know the purpose behind this. You can build an entire career these days out of being a victim or an expert on diversity and inclusion or racial rifts or whatever. There is so much money involved in this. There's so much leverage involved in this. The current greatest example is Ibram X. Kendi, who has promoted anti-racism as his religion and has reaped the rewards. Jack Dorsey from Twitter last year gave him a $10 million grant to his anti-racism research center, or whatever it was. It's incredible. You know, people brand them, they hang out a shingle as a diversity and inclusion expert and then go on to consult with companies for big paydays and go on to talk at conventions for big paydays. Robin DiAngelo has taken the phrase white fragility and turned that into a forever career. Now, it is a big business. And anybody who says that that is not a motivator to this is lying or completely ignorant of the reality of things. Bridget, man, we can make infinite power with MLK rolling in his grave. No kidding, right? No kidding. Yeah. Never mind content of character. We need to teach kids about the color of their skin. Mirror universe, to bring in a Star Trek reference. But here we are. Anyway, everyone, I'm going to end it here. Thank you guys so much for joining me both last week and this week. If you enjoy this kind of stuff, or if you don't enjoy this kind of stuff, let me know in the comments below, because you can no longer effectively do so by hitting like or dislike, although I do appreciate the likes, and I think the algorithm still does too, so do that. If you'd like to hear more from me, you can find me on this channel Thursday nights at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for TED Excellence, where I take a look at off-brand TED Talks and what they have to teach us about the world today and where we may be headed. Elsewise, everyone, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you are all having a good weekend. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things, even though everyone here is so well behaved. You have very little to do. Everybody who donated, thank you. Thank you so much for your generosity. I really do appreciate it. Have a great rest of your Sunday, everybody. I hope you're all safe and well. If you are not well, please get well soon, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.